Hi, HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today we have a special guest. We're joined by Erik van Vulpen. Erik is a HR analytics expert and founder of Analytics in HR. Welcome to the show, Erik. How are you?
Thank you very much. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm not bad, not bad. Erik, for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit more about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks for having me, Chris. Very excited to be here. I'm Erik van Vulpen. I think my journey with analytics goes back to my studies. I studied law, psychology, and business administration. And during my graduation studies, I did some research for a corporate law firm. And they had the big challenge, I think, that almost all law firms are running into. They wanted to be more innovative and at the same time sell more billable hours. And that kind of triggered me because my background in psychology really focuses on the processes in an organization. How engaged are people? How do people feel? And how does that then impact their warm and fuzzy feelings? And then the business administration part really focuses on the organizational outcomes, the performance, the innovation outcomes, etc. So for this law firm, I studied whether and what processes in the firm led to more innovation outcomes, innovative work behavior. And what process in the firm led in the end to more billable hours, so more revenue for the firm. Did that using a big data set from the firm and some questionnaire data, meshing it all together and doing very, very applied research, not knowing that 3-4 years later that would be called HR analytics, and we'd all be very excited about doing that kind of research. But I already was very excited. Then a few years later, I kind of ran into the concept of HR analytics, and then together with my current co-founder Nando Steenhuis, we're thinking like, hey, this is interesting. Let's talk to some HR managers about what HR analytics is. So we wrote an email to some of the larger companies in the Netherlands, and within a few weeks we usually got okay, welcome, come have a cup of coffee. And we were talking to these managers, and instead of us asking them the question of, hey, what are you doing with HR analytics? They asked us the question of, what is HR analytics? And what can I do with HR analytics? And what's the business case behind analytics? And what tools do I need to buy in order to get going with HR analytics? And we had that conversation once, twice, 3 times, 5 times, 10 times. And at number 20, we're like, there's surely a pattern here. Because there's a lot of interest in HR analytics, but people are not really sure what it is, what the business case is, what they can get from it, and how they can actually get started. So that for us was the inspiration of why we started analyticsinhr.com, our blog, and these days the leading blog in the people analytics space. We attract a lot of visitors every single day who all want to read about what is HR analytics, how do I do data-driven HR, how do I work with metrics, how do I align my metrics with business outcomes, with the business. So that's the story of Analytics in HR, which we started almost 2 years ago now. And about a year ago, we got a lot of requests of people saying, hey, I want to learn more than just read a few articles. I want to really learn about it. And that's when we started the HR Analytics Academy, which now is the largest online academy. If you want to learn about HR Analytics, you go there and you can learn about the specific subsets within analytics. So that's basically the story where I am, and I didn't do it alone. I've Nando Steenhuis, my co-founder, who's really a brilliant guy, and we have a whole team of very talented people now who are all working to basically spread the word about analytics.
Amazing. So you certainly didn't plan this to be your career like many people, right? You kind of just saw the need there. What is it about the analytics that kept you excited, and to the point where you decided, you know what, we're going to build a whole business around this?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's for me, it was really, when I studied psychology, I was really intrigued by psychology. I studied and graduated. I wrote my thesis with Wilma Schauffele, which only the very, very engagement-focused geeks will know. He's the professor who really coined the engagement concept. So we had a lot in the curriculum, a lot about engagement and what engagement did and how you can get your people engaged. Well, I was always very triggered in, okay, then people are engaged, but what happens then with the organization? And that always got me going of, hey, okay, you can do a lot of processes in HR and you can get them an HR outcome, people are more engaged, but what happens afterwards? What's the business case in the end for the organization? And I'm thinking like, hey, I want to be a manager. I started studying business administration, not knowing that I would be in HR analytics a few years later. So it's quite coincidental.
Fantastic. So when you think about HR analytics, what does it mean to you, and why is it so important for businesses?
I always like to start with the quite boring scientific definition of Sjoerd van der Heuvel. That's HR analytics is the identification and quantification of the people drivers of business outcomes. So what's happening in the business? Which processes do you see? How are your people getting engaged? And then how does that translate to business outcomes? And if you do that well in a quantitative way, then you're basically doing analytics. So that's the definition that I like best, and it's I think the most boring one, but it's the most stable, and it's really the best one. The quantification of the people drives of business outcomes.
Yeah. So what area of HR analytics most excites you then today? Because now we're seeing it explode, right? You can't really mention HR without analytics, predictive, prescriptive, AI. It's a lot of the HR leaders I speak to, it's almost overwhelming now. So I'm just wondering from your perspective, what area of HR analytics most excites you?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the easy answer would be all areas, because I really love HR analytics. You mentioned descriptive and prescriptive. And of course, what's really exciting that we've all heard of the turnover analytics and predicting which people would quit. Well, only the percentage of companies that are doing those kinds of analytics, if it's more than 5%, I would be quite surprised, to be honest. There's so much to gain in just applying simple analytics, getting your descriptives right, just combining your core metrics of, hey, how many people are leaving a year and how much of that percentage of the turnover is unwanted versus wanted turnover. And it's the most boring. It's a lot of people call it data-driven HR, not necessarily HR analytics, because we're only doing descriptive analytics, so it's not like the advanced stuff. But still, I think the biggest win for the most organizations is still in that very, very applied, quite simple area. So that's for a big part where I'm quite excited about. And if I have to specify anything in general, I would say learning and development, getting as much as many people the skills they need in order to apply analytics. That's how you change. That's how you change HR as a field.
Well, on that point, most companies I speak to are just getting started with the analytics journey. So what should HR leaders consider when getting started with HR analytics, and what should the focus be on?
That's a good question. On the very practical side, what I always like to tell is that if you get started with HR analytics, you're doing something very different from the status quo, from what has been happening for a long, long time, probably within your organization, within HR. So when I speak with people, I always try to. 5 years ago in class, I had an article. It was from Dr. John Cotter, his name was, and the article was called "Transformational Change: How Leading Change Feels and What You Can." I don't know the exact title, but it goes through 8 different steps. It's about creating a vision, creating a sense of urgency, and creating a process that enables you to change not only in the next few months to make something happen, but to change something over a period of, I think the average change or organizational transformation is 8 till 10 years. And then if you keep changing at that pace, at a very rapid pace for a long time, then you'll be successful. And I think that kind of mindset of, hey, we're going to do analytics and okay, what can I have next year? That's the kind of mindset I don't really like. It's for me really, hey, how are we going to change something, and how are we going to establish something that will last the next 5 years, the next 10 years? I partly lost track of your question, but that's
saying where should we start? But I think you kind of answered it.
When people get started, I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind. Not, hey, how am I going to do something that will impact HR in a year? How am I going to do something that impacts HR in 10 years that will totally transform the organization we're in? And what are the different short-term wins? What are the short steps I'll take in half a year, in a year, going towards that goal? That will then create a benefit, an immediate benefit for the organization. as a tip on how to get started, I think that's where you should go.
What about the data? Because whenever I speak to HR leaders, one of the first things they talk to me about is the quality of their data that exists in the business, because without that, everything almost seems to be irrelevant. So could you share your experience in this area on around the quality of data and how companies should approach that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the areas that's quite overlooked till now, which is data integrity. One of the master classes we'll launch in a few weeks actually is about global data integrity. And we all know that the garbage in, garbage out saying. And it's really true. If you work with messy data, you're not going to do a successful analysis. What a lot of companies can benefit a lot from is looking at their HR systems. How are we entering? How are the HR business partners, the HR administrative people, how are they entering the data into the systems? And how can we optimize it in a way that they basically can't put faulty or messy, or basically they can't put garbage in? And a very, very, very simple example is I think one of the Alyssa Ruff, who gives the course, gives an example. It's about racial and racial diversity in companies, which in the US, as far as I know, is quite important, and you need to keep track of that, how racially diverse you are. Well, for example, in Germany or in the Netherlands, where I'm from, good luck putting someone's race in a system, but you shouldn't do that because that will cost you a lot of money. That's absolutely prohibited. So those you have a global system. You are in multiple countries, and the way you enter your data in a system differs from country to country. And you see something similar happening, for example, in India, where people in general are promoted every single year, because if they don't get a promotion, they're very likely to quit. So the promotion cycle is every year, or even shorter than a year. Well, in Europe and the US, it's every 3-4 years that people get promoted on average. So how do you keep track of that data, and how do you register it in a way that as an analyst, you know that if someone made 2 steps, 2 promotions in the US, it's very different than when someone made 2 promotions in India. How do you make that in a system that layers that kind of data in an accurate and integrated way? And I think when you talk about garbage in and garbage out, or data quality, that's really where a lot of companies can achieve a lot of success. Just looking at their systems, how are we putting data in, and can we make mandatory fields that people are not really using, make them unmake them mandatory? Because if you have a mandatory field, people will put in a 0 or a 1, and your data will be much more garbage like.
Yeah. Could you dispel the myth? There's so many of these new systems and tools, and there's so many different options now. Every single company claims to have the best. I'm not going to mention any names, systems in place, but have you found any are they all doing the same thing pretty much with a different layer, a different interface, or have you found any organizations that are really leading the way that you can recommend? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of new stuff and a lot of new tools out there, and usually it's these. If you don't look at the really big solutions, the more novel, innovative tools, they're really quite good at doing very specialized things. So an onboarding process, how do you optimize that in a very efficient way? Employee feedback, 360-degree feedback, how do you do that in a very interactive way? And because they're so specialized, they can do it way better than the big ERP vendors that we all know. So on the details, they are very, very good. And I would recommend a lot of organizations to look into them and to see what they're doing, and maybe copy it and develop it internally, or work with the vendor together and purchase that software and start working and implement that software. But on the other hand, what's when you're in an organization, you should really be aware of is how do those different tools integrate, and how does coming from an HR analytics perspective, how does the data from those tools, do you have access to the data, or is it a SaaS platform with a dashboard and you can't get access to the data? Because as an organization, you want the data in your hands. And how can you then structure the employee journey using all those very specific, really high quality tools, but still get the data from it, and then optimize your employee life cycle as soon as they enter the organization, your onboarding, your applicant tracking system, all the way to your performance management and your feedback system. How can you integrate all that kind of data? And if you do that very well, you can get tremendous value from a way of continuously measuring what your employees are doing and optimizing that. And I think if companies start looking at software vendors that way, like, hey, how can I attach it to the different contact points in the employee lifecycle and streamline that kind of data and do a continuous analytics on it? And I'm not really sure if companies are already doing it. It's very, very rare. Then I think you get a lot of value.
What companies from your research and conversations are doing this really well that our listeners can maybe look into as a case study? I know, for example, I know, of course, people like Facebook and Microsoft that I've had on the show, they're doing it very well. And Shell, for example, very, very well. I'm just wondering if there's any organizations you've come across that have got a very good process in place.
I've heard a presentation a while ago from Salesforce. And they were doing something very similar. They had a similar challenge. I don't know what the exact piece of software was, but they had a very specific problem that they wanted to solve. And what they did, they looked at the vendors, and I think they had, Salesforce has quite some people, so the vendors were charging prices that I won't specify it, but
most people can't afford.
Yeah. There were big numbers. And then the guy who was giving the presentation said, he went to the IT department and he said, hey, I need this functional software. So the software needs these principles. These principles need to work. And they made basically a minimum viable product that solved the problem. So they
basically ended up building their own.
They ended up building their own. They had full access to their data. And it was a very, very cheap alternative that worked.
Yeah. And it's funny, most of the time now, because I'm looking at the prices of it always comes up at our workshops. The prices of some of these solutions are just crazy. And you're right. In most cases, you can actually build the whole solution yourself for a lot less. You can actually own the software and actually build it bespoke to what you need. Yeah, but that's a whole new challenge on its own.
But Chris, how many? Because you talk to a lot of HR analytics people. How many HR analytics people know how to design software principles?
Exactly. Yeah.
Build the software and test it, and then build a second version and a third.
Only
version
a few.
Operational.
A very, very, very small number.
A very small number. But as soon as people start trying that or start working together with people who can actually help them with that, I think that would be a huge win.
Yeah. Well, again, a good example with Microsoft, they had their own solutions in the analytics space. And Dawn Klinghoffer, who heads up their HR analytics, she works with the product team in Microsoft to build their solution, to help build the solution. So you have the practitioner perspective, and then you have the customer perspective, and then they're working together on their products. That's a very unique partnership that they have there. So not only are they offering it to companies all over the world, but they're also using the same solution internally within their analytics team.
And that's fantastic.
That's I suppose a pretty unique example because it's very much embedded in the culture of the business to operate that way. Yeah. So one of the things that is just really a challenge right now is obviously is the skills that exist in HR at the moment aren't they don't exist to actually go to deliver on the analytics space, right? So what skills do companies need to acquire or develop in order to do HR analytics?
Yeah, you have the traditional set of, hey, you need your business acumen to find the business outcome that's relevant and to tackle a problem that's relevant to that. You need your HR research or your HR competencies you need your statistical knowledge. You need your and that's kind of the basic setup and the basic skills that everyone is talking about. I think it's I would put it in a kind of a layer cake structure. You have your core skills that you need, which if you start with analytics is probably someone who understands the business, who can make a business case or at least make an estimation of cost and time, how much it will take to get some analytics off the ground. Someone with knowledge in HR, who knows what's happening, who knows the processes and who knows the people in HR, which is just as important as knowing the processes internally in terms of data. And someone with a basic background in statistics, who has worked with basic statistics, knows how the IT infrastructure works, the IT landscape works. And if you have either one or two or three people with those skill sets working together, you can already do a lot. And then you're not doing the fancy predictive analyses because you don't have those skills yet, but you don't need them because you're starting to build a vision, a common sense, a common understanding of how important data is, what you can do with data, and you can get into the basics of dashboarding of your descriptive analytics. Without really needing your data scientist and the very advanced stuff. And then at some point, you need those kinds of skills to keep adding value and add even more value usually. Then you go and start working with the data scientist. So that's usually the two layers, the basic skills that you need to start with analytics, which is really about stakeholder management and about building support. And then the second layer, which is really the in-depth knowledge, which you usually need a few years down the line. And then in your general HR, you have a lot of business partners who are working, who in the end need to change their mindset. They need to start working with the data. They need to start to get an understanding of, hey, how does HR analytics work? Just the basic concepts, because they are the people who are entering a lot of the data. If they start to help you, it will benefit your analytics efforts a lot. So those people also need to get a knowledge of what is analytics and how can I, for example, use dashboards to, not go to the manager and say, hey, how can I help you today? What you see happening with a lot of business partners, then they go to the manager and before they go, they look into the dashboard and they see, hey, there's a problem with turnover. There's a low engagement in this department or in this team for this manager. There are a number of issues, and how can we solve them? So looking at the data to identify a number of issues, and how can we then solve them, and going with a filled out block note to the manager and say, okay, I have 4 things that I noticed. How are we going to tackle them together? And that going from the empty block note to a written block note going to the manager, I think that's really the change of an operational or mostly operational business partner to a tactical or almost strategic business partner. Which is where how the business partner originally was designed. It's a tactical or even strategic person who is partner with the business and who really understands what's happening. So that's a second layer of skills for general HR. And for analytics to be successful, you need to be able to implement that in your business partners, and your general HR therefore needs to be trained, needs to be skilled, and know what analytics is and know how to apply at least the basics of it.
And what have you found to be the biggest challenge that companies face when building the teams?
In what regard?
In terms of bringing that team together, right, and building it from the ground upwards, where do most companies fall short?
It's really to me, and from what I'm seeing, and it's really in building coalitions. So HR working together with IT. With a data analytics unit, if that's present in the organization, sometimes even with marketing to get a message out and almost sell analytics. Because a lot of teams that get started, they spend the first 1-2 years trying to establish a groundwork for analytics, and that's they're not doing the value added analysis. They're not helping out the business. They're trying to get to build legitimacy for analytics, which is understandable, but on the other hand, while you're doing it, you're not really adding value. So how can you start adding value and then by adding value, lay the groundwork? That's what a lot of organizations are struggling with. And it is because they're not really used to working together with IT, with the finance department to get a batch of financial data to combine that to do your comp and benefits analysis. You need your financial data for that. So it's really I see a lot of companies weirdly enough struggling to work together with the other departments and building trust and say, hey, we are capable of analyzing data, send the data to us, and we know how to deal with that.
And if you do that, you don't need to then sell it because you're already delivering value, right?
Yeah, no, but that's really the thing. That's you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I've seen that many of the most successful leaders that I've spoken to have spent most of their time in the first 6 to 12 months building relationships, and then just choosing 1 or 2 things, strategic priorities of the business, and then adding value. because that way, you know, the best way to get the buy-in is to show the value
Yeah, no,
in real time, and just choose one or two things specifically for maybe for each of those departments that you can help and add value. Then you'll get their buy-in.
no, but
Knocking on your door after, asking you for help.
that's absolutely it. And also for one of the courses that we have is the HR analyst lead course, and it really is targeted to the leader of the analytics team, usually the person who starts alone and has to set it all up. And I think the most important skill for that kind of person, that the figurehead person, is really building alliances and managing stakeholders.
Yeah.
And a lot of people overlook that. They think, oh yeah, they need to know analytics and they need to be able to work with the data. No. You need to
not at all.
You need to figure out what the expectations are, manage them very, very precise, set a vision and create short-term wins. And it's all about stakeholder management and expectation management and building alliances.
It's a different skill set, right?
It's a very soft skill set in a sense.
Yeah.
So yeah,
because I've noticed that because you know, some of the vice president directors of analytics that I speak to don't have that much technical knowledge, but they've been put in that position because they can convey that message into a language that the board can understand and the business can understand, and they can build those relationships and leave all of the, you know, the actual HR analytics to their team.
Yeah, no, that's it. And I've also seen companies who, or a specific company who had a very technical guy as a lead of the department, and he was working with a colleague who was very social, very connecting. You know, really someone who connected everyone together. And that so it was the lead was more like sitting in his cubicle and crunching the data, and the person below him was just building the network and building an alliance. I was thinking like that should be the other way around.
But that's what happens though. Just because they have the technical skill set doesn't mean they can tell the story and engage and build relationships. That's a completely different set of skills that you need there. That's something that I've, in my conversations with analytics, HR analytics leaders, this comes up more and more time after time. And I think companies need to keep that in mind when they choose their lead.
It's funny to make HR data driven. You really need soft skills.
Soft skills. It all goes back to it always goys back to the soft skills, right?
Yeah. Or in HR. So
yeah. So could you share a project that you've been through or a transformation that you've been part of or within your own organization that stands out to you with our listeners?
Yeah, what we so a lot of our students when they go through the courses, we try to interact as much as possible with them. And quite frequent when I talk to students, I get emails of saying like, hey, I did this specific lesson, and I looked at our HR or our metrics card in the company, and I saw we had, she already knew in this case. She said, we had a list of over 100 metrics, and she was going over them, and she said, how relevant are they and how important are they to the business? And she said there were only a few metrics that were really important, and by doing this lesson and by like paying attention and applying it directly, I was able to scrap most of the metrics that we were keeping track of, but that basically didn't add any value. And we got a lot of those stories also from analysts that do the course and then say, hey, I had one coming up to me and he said, yeah, I work for a very fast-moving consumer goods, I think is the proper sector, with a lot of employees who work for a number of months, half a year, 3/4 of a year, and then they quit. And the recruiters for that company, they were specifically hiring people who had already worked at a company because they would onboard faster, and that would be a very efficient way to get them on. And the guy said, yeah, we don't work with data at all, but I have the feeling that they're hiring the wrong people. So he started looking at through the data, and what he discovered is that the reason why people were let go. Usually people quit after a number of months because either they didn't like it or they were fraudulent things like theft from the cash register, a really bad performance. Those kinds of reasons were often exit criteria why they were fired. So the recruiters were hiring the people that he already had experience with the firm, so or with the company, with the shop, so he'll be productive very, very quickly. Well, in fact, it was usually quite the exact other way around. So he looked at the statistics and he said, hey, the people that haven't worked for us, how long do they stay at the company? And the people that have worked for us, how long do they stay at the company? And it was very counterintuitive. The people that hadn't worked at the company would in the end stay longer than the people that had worked. Simply because the recruiters didn't have access to the exit data. Why did people leave? So those kinds of stories are quite awesome. You hear them and it makes sense when you hear them. But when you're in the process, it makes sense to do it the way you've always been doing it. And those kinds of stories, they're really why you're doing it and why you're while we're teaching and while we're connecting the instructors that we have to the audience that we have, because that really builds value, and that changes the way HR is working, and that's
those are the things that can be dispelled through data, right? Very easily, and it's a very easy example as well.
It's not that you need gigantic amounts of data or very specific statistical knowledge.
So what's in terms of the students to come and join you, what are the typical organizations or level of the members? Are you getting a lot of students that are studying the field, or is it mainly practitioners within businesses? What is the main audience that you have?
The main audience are really the practitioners. Usually, we do have an age profile, and I haven't looked at that for some time.
Your own analytics.
But it is people with 10, 20, sometimes even 30 years of experience. It's somewhere in that range. Who either hear of analytics and they're setting up a department on analytics, or they're really crunching the numbers. They've been working a good number of years in HR, and they're thinking, hey, this data-driven thing, I really want to know more about it, and they start learning. So usually it's fairly senior people, and the type of companies that we that we work with are. They're the larger companies. It's I think the large majority, I think 90% plus is has more than 10,000 employees. So they're generally the well-known companies that that really want analytics as a core competency in their business. So they want to develop it internally, because they have so many people that it's viable to have their own analytics department, and they're not going to go to a consultant and say, hey, can you do these analyses for me? Because in the end they want to do it, be able to do it on their own. And what's the most common question that they have for you? We get a lot of questions. During the course, we get a lot of questions still on building the business case and how do you do that properly. In fact, so much that we've recently added a lesson just to address that question, because there's very often still that notion of, hey, you need a business case, you need to know how much it's going to cost, what your timeline is, what the return on investment is, and ROI is something that people are a bit scared about. How do I do that? How do I calculate the return on analytics? So people have a preconceived notion of the building the business case as something that's very hard to do and requires a lot of calculations. Well, at most organizations, building the business case or presenting a business case is just a rough estimation of what are your timelines and what are you going to achieve, and not necessarily in financial output, but what are your deliverables, how much time is it going to cost, and what is your budget. So you see a lot of people worrying about, hey, how do I build a business? How do I build a business case internally? Even though if it's much it's in a sense much easier than they think it is, because if they just come up with a timeline with a number of deliverables and an estimation of, hey, what's the budget, they're already almost always there already.
And in terms of, we were talking about the structure earlier, I was wondering, because I've seen some different opinions on this. Do you think that HR analytics should sit underneath the CHRO, or do you think it should operate independently?
That's a very good question. And there are people that I respect tremendously that disagree with each other on that question.
I know. I was just wondering.
You have the opinion of people saying, hey, you're doing HR, so you should be in HR. Like it's very black and white, and I think that makes sense. You also have people saying, hey,
it's no longer just about HR though, is it?
Nah,
it's a lot bigger than that now.
That's
Well, not a lot
true.
bigger, but it's
That's true. I think in 5 years, Chris, in 5 or 10 years' time, that the organizations that are starting now in 5 or 10 years, they'll have an analytics competency center or an analytics hub in the organization, and you have one or two people doing people or workforce or
within that.
whatever you want to call it.
I'm with you.
So I think that's the future.
Chief data officer.
Yeah.
And then you have all the different areas.
And then you have the specialization. You have
specializations.
A number of people on finance. You have number on people analytics or workforce analytics or HR analytics or whatever you want to call it. I think that's where we're going to in 5 to 10 years. How you're going there, I think it also depends on the company. If you have a high level support within HR to become more data driven, do it in HR. Like if you have that room to start to generate results, I'm fine if it happens in HR. If you feel like HR is very restrictive, and usually if you feel that you are in HR, you want to get out of HR, so then you're not gonna get out of HR. That's kind of the then do it outside of HR. There's things to say about both of them.
Because some companies keep that within finance. That I've seen. For a long time, the HR analytics team, and for example, in Microsoft, were in the finance department. Yeah, and they didn't operate underneath HR.
Yeah, and for the finance department, I always have there's always the notion of hey, the finance department, when they need to make people decisions, they're going to do it in the financial way, and as an HR
just
person,
purely by the spreadsheet and nothing else.
Yeah. and I think that's
a big problem. We can't have that.
To some degree, that's I think a legit fear. So if I could choose, I wouldn't put it in finance. Whether to put it in HR,
I think it's a whole new department. I think literally every company in the future will have a chief data officer.
I'm very much of that opinion that in 5-10 years you have a specialized analytics hub in the organization, and those
every
people
department
work together, and people data and financial data will be very fluent. They will mix, and together with your marketing data, that's the data aggregation will be at such a high level that those roles at some point will also start to disappear. So I absolutely believe in that future. How we get there, whether we should put it in HR or outside of HR, I think there's a good thing to say, like, hey, really build an analytics department and focus on that, and put it outside of HR in like a specific analytics department, but not many people are doing that. So that I would prefer that approach, but until then, do it in HR and at least become data driven. And just get started.
Talking about going back to what we mentioned earlier about the skill set, a lot of these skills already exist in companies, right?
They do.
Exist. For example, in finance, you have the analysts. Yeah, and in many organizations, they already have all of these skills. But just in other departments, do you think it'd be a good idea for companies to tap into those guys first that already exist in their business before bringing outside in? What do you think about that?
Absolutely, no, that they should. And one of the funny things is here in the Netherlands is a good country for HR analytics. Like we're I think one of the leaders in the world.
I've noticed.
Shell, ABN AMRO, the Ahold. I don't know how you say it in English.
Ahold, yeah.
We have the and many more that I'm forgetting now. Which people? ING, absolutely.
Philips are doing some good things as well.
Philips are really interesting research on it. Anyway, so there's quite a few companies that are now catching on, and they're putting the vacancies in the Dutch job boards on the HR analytics people that they look for, and that's always funny to me because they're looking for someone who has a background in HR/psychology. So who understands those processes, who has a background in business because they need to understand the business, who has a background in IT because they also need IT skills, who has very advanced statistical knowledge, who can do programming in R and preferably also Python, and then they have 2 or 3 more.
That's a very niche.
You'll never find someone like that.
That doesn't exist. That's 2 different jobs.
It's
2 different roles.
Yeah, it's maybe
one of each.
More, Chris. And people, so you see those vacancies, and then a month later I check again, and they still have that vacancy.
Of course.
So yeah, and of course I know very, very, very few people who can.
Both technical skills and the soft skills.
Yeah, I know. I was about to say I know very few people, but I think I know none that are like that excel in all of them, because that's almost impossible. If you excel at one skill set, you don't have the other skill set.
It's hard. That's not.
Yeah.
It's not often. I think I know maybe one person. I think in my mind that does both. Because I was very surprised when I first started our analytics series. I thought that everyone I would be speaking to would be technical experts, and actually all of the leaders I speak to all have the soft skills.
Yeah.
And the technical skills exist within their team.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. But then you're right. When you see the job adverts and when you see it looks for all of those technical skills and all of the soft skills and all of the management skills, it's like that's a tough.
Yeah, no, it's so the skills are in the business, and one of the things that I don't know if you see it happen, but then companies are hiring a data scientist, really good at analyzing in-depth data, and in HR they're, how much, what's the percentage of time that they're really analyzing the data? 10%, if they're lucky, 20%. Most of the time is if you are looking for someone with that diverse skill set, most of the time they're using the basic skills and not diving into Python, not doing the data analysis. So yeah, go to someone in the finance department who can do a few hours of data analysis for you every week.
Yeah,
and you're good, and you can make an impossible vacancy to fill a possible vacancy to fill, because you don't need people with statistical background, R, Python, who can also do the other stuff. You can drop those requirements and you can find very competent people who can implement analytics in your organization.
Yeah,
I think do work together. That's the main message.
Very interesting. It's very interesting. I think that's very important. Actually, a very important point you've made there. I think companies need to think about that. That kind of leads me on to I think we've already covered this in some sense, but what does my last question really was, what does the future hold? People analytics, and what effect will technology have on HR? Over the coming years, because right now I think we're at the very beginning of the journey in my mind, especially with the conversations I'm having. Although many organizations will make you feel that they're very far light years ahead, they're not really. In what they're doing. It's a bit of an illusion. And a lot of the vendors that are promising the world aren't actually delivering on that from what I'm hearing. So what does the future hold in your mind? How look in the next few years?
You're absolutely right about that. Like the vendors, they're selling, they're saying, with the software you can do HR analytics.
We'll tell you who's leaving and what day and where they're going. And
that's always a bit frustrating. That's why I never try to mention vendors, either in a good way or in a bad way. But I do have my opinion about them.
Yeah.
I think that the future of HR is really, and I wrote an article on the Unleashed blog about a month ago. I think that the future really is about what I mentioned previously about having a digital people strategy, where you know the employee life cycle, what are the contact points in the organization, and how can you optimize each of those points for the employee, optimize them so the employee stays longer, is happier, etc. But you can also get data from them, and you can, using that data, you can optimize that process. I think that's one of the, that's very important. And about a few months ago, I wrote in the article, I was interviewed by someone from, a German, one of the big consultancies from Germany, and she was doing a preliminary study. And so she was asking a number of questions just basically to gauge interest, and she talked to 20, 30 people, and just basically to see like, hey, what resonated with them and what didn't, and then they would do a full-on survey on the topics that resonated. And one of the questions that she asked was do you know any companies that have a digital HR strategy? And I was thinking, I said, yeah, I know one company here in the Netherlands that a friend worked at, and they were implementing a digital strategy. And why were they doing that? Because they had, I think, 70 or 80 or even 90 different HR apps that the employees could use, and no one had any idea where they could fill in their vacation days, say that they were absent, or the onboarding apps. It was just a jungle of all different kinds of employee apps. And what the organization was doing, they were going through all those apps, building one point of entry, and then the different functionalities were then solved by the different apps. So they were creating an overarching strategy with one point of entry, and then employees could very simply select the very specialized apps that they were using. So that company discovered that they had a huge problem, and they started fixing it. So I said, yeah, I know one company, and I told this story. And she was kind of surprised. She said, I talked to 12 people who know the market really well, who are either consultants or are well connected in the market. And she said, you're the first one who knows a company with a digital HR strategy. And that for me was really, I just know that one company, and I know no other HR organization that does it very well. And that's so many that no one knows that. And I think that's really when you talk about the future of HR, it's really about deploying HR technology in a very, very smart way to basically make the quantified employee and to optimize everything to make the employees happy and more productive. And no company is thinking of, or almost no company is thinking about that yet.
I'm going to start asking that on every single podcast now, just for you. What is your digital HR? What is your digital HR strategy?
And I would really like it, Chris, if you then make a compilation after 10 or 20 of those questions.
Yeah.
And then well, I'll be, and just share it on the internet.
I'm interested to see what people's responses are. I haven't asked that question, but I do ask, obviously, what is the impact of technology had on your department? But I don't really get the same answer. So that's an interesting one. And I was thinking about that when you said it, and I can't really think of any organizations that have
a coherent digital strategy for HR.
In certain areas, yes, but in terms of an end-to-end strategy from the whole employee life cycle, no, I don't really know of any.
So I think that's if companies do that well, that would be a huge leap for analytics and a huge for digital technology in general.
Perfect. Well, look, Erik, you've been an amazing guest. Before I let you go, if there's one piece of guidance to all of the HR leaders out there, what would that be?
Learn about analytics. All the HR leaders learn about analytics, what it can do for your organization. And to put a sales plug in there, go to analytics and HR.
Oh, that was my next question. Where can we find you? I wasn't going to forget about you.
I beat you to it. Yeah, on analyticsandhr.com, we're the world's largest platform providing information from the best of the best instructors and writers in the world. We feature them. We promote their articles so everyone gets to see them. And the hranalyticsacademy.com, where we use the top instructors in the world. Together with them, we create online classes, online master classes, online courses, and it's the best people. It's self-paced, and you can learn about analytics and really learn about it and the practical application, how it can generate value to the organization. And that's really my mission. And if I can give one piece of advice, I would say read about it, learn about it, and start going with analytics.
Fantastic. Well, look, guys, head over to hrleaders.com. There you'll find all of the show notes on the episode. I'll put the links to everything, to the website, the HR Analytics, AIHR website on there, everything you guys need. Erik, thanks again for taking the time to join us, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and share so that others can benefit from the great knowledge and experience. See you tomorrow.